Hello everyone. In this video we're going to learn how to request data from an API and display on our app. For that we're going to use this free API called Board API, and what we want to do is we want to make a request to this endpoint and display that data on our app. So let's start creating our app. Studio. Let's create a new project. We want an empty activity. And here, let's call it HTTP request example. Let's wait for our app to load. So here on the layout, we want to be able to put a button where we're going to press the button and the app's going to make that request. And we also need some text views to display the data from that request. So let's go ahead and implement that. Let's delete this text view and let's drag some text view here on the top. Let's give it some constraint. $60 from the top, 20 from the left, and 20 from the right. Okay, another text view. And let's give it some constraints. 20, 20, and 20. Okay, so we have two text views, and let's add a button. Let's give it a constraint of 100 from the top. Perhaps 100 is too much. Let's do 50. 20 from the left and 20 from the right. Okay, let's change the text of this button to something that makes more sense. Let's put request data. We can also change some attributes here just to make it look a little different. So let's change the font or the size, I guess, size to 20. And okay, that should be enough. Here we want the text view to have an ID. It already have an ID of text view, which is fine. And text view 2 and button also have an ID. Okay, now that we have these UI components on our screen, we want to create references to those UI components on our activity. So let's do that. So val text view title equals find view by ID. It's going to be type of text view. And we know that the ID is just text view. We also want to create a text view detail. Type the text view. And the ID is text view 2. Now we also want a reference to the button, so val button equals find view by ID. It's going to be type button, and the ID is also button. Okay, so when we press the button, we want to put a click listener. So every time I press the button, what we want to do is make that request to the API and display the data on our text view, title and detail. So to make the request, Android has a framework called Volley. So we're going to be using that. So first thing we have to do is create a queue. Well, queue equals Volley dot new request queue. Request queue. And here we have to pass the context. It's going to be this. So you're going to notice that here the Volley is going to be red because we haven't imported that framework yet. If you press on it and go to the bottom, you will see add dependency and import. So if you press that, Android is actually gonna pull that data for you and gonna import the Volley toolbox. So now that we have the queue, the next step is create a URL. So the URL is going to be from our API. We just have to copy the link where we're going to be making the request. So that's going to be our URL. And now what we want to do is a JSON request so we can map that data and display inside of our text view. So let's create a JSON request. So var JSON object request equals JSON object request. And here we have to pass our URL. We also have to pass the method. So the method actually is going to be request dot method dot get. We have to import that. Get. The way we know it's get is because all the API is going to have that information here. It could be get, post, put, delete, add. It depends on the API. So here we know it's a get request. And we now pass the URL. We are not going to listen for errors, so we can just pass null. And we also need a response listener. So we can create a response listener. So response dot listener. Let me organize this data here because it's becoming hard to read. Response listener, and we need response. I don't know why is it complaining here, but it looks correct. Okay, for our response listener, we're gonna have, well, I guess we have to pass our error listening. Let's create one here. Response error. Listen. And here error, even though we're not going to be doing anything with it. Something's complaining error here. Oh, it's because I'm missing an S. Okay, so here we have our response. In case we had an error, it would call this function, but we don't care about error message here right now. Let's just deal with the response. So val response equal, not response, we want from that response we want to get the activity, and we can display also the type. So let's get the activity and type. Val activity equals response, and we want to access the activity, and we want it to be a string, and we know that it is a string because we can see the response here. And we also want to get the type, so response type. After getting that data, we want to set our text view title and text view detail to the activity and the type. So text view title dot text equals activity, and text view detail dot text equals type. So now every time we press the button, we are going to create a queue, and we're going to create the request, and we had to add this request to our queue. So queue.add request, and we can pass the JSON object request. So after pressing the button, we create a queue, we add this JSON object to our queue, and as soon as we get the response from that request, we're gonna map the data to what we want and display on our text view. Another thing that we have to do is, before we even be able to use HTTP requests, we have to go to Android manifest and add a permission, internet permission. So you use permission, and we add this permission to be able to make HTTP requests. After we have that, we should be able to run our app. And what this API does is, every time you make a request, they're gonna return a random activity for you to do. And they also return extra information about that activity. So every time we press the button on our app, we should be able to see different activity. It might take a few seconds because we are making an HTTP request, and depending on the response, it can take long or not. So let's press the button, and we should be able to see a new activity and the type of activity. If we press again, we're gonna get another random activity. And again, that's how you make HTTP requests and display data from API in your app. Thank you so much.